By the end of this course, you will have learned how to develop key metrics to highlight important project information, create a tracking sheet to manage project progression, set up a well-structured metric sheet that will drive your dashboard, and finally, configure a dashboard that will be digestible and attractive to your audience. Key metrics play a vital role in the world of data analytics and performance tracking. So it's really important to spend time in developing well thought out and measurable goals. These goals set the stage for the metrics you use to communicate how well you're achieving the goal. Performance measure specialist Stacy Barr has great information on how to create impactful performance measures. According to Barr, the formula for a measurable goal is a noun plus a linking verb plus an adjective or adverb phrase. Using this formula, one example of a measurable goal would be projects are completed in a timely manner. As you develop your metrics, I highly encourage you to refer to some of Stacy's free training and resources. For the dashboard we'll build at the end of the course, we'll be using the following metrics to tie into the measurable goal that we mentioned earlier: the number of projects expected to start and end by each quarter, the number of projects actually started and ended by each quarter, and the number of projects that are delayed in the portfolio. Go ahead and refer to page 7 in your course book to complete the optional Metrics Lab exercise. Before we start building our solution, let's first cover some Smartsheet basics so that we're all on the same page. Now, when you log into Smartsheet, you'll find the main navigation pane on your left-hand side. You'll start on your home page that will have any open requests for you or for collaborators that you send update requests or approval requests to. You'll be able to quickly navigate to any recently opened sheets, reports, or dashboards, create a new item, or search for existing Smartsheet items. When you receive a Smartsheet alert, whether it be an approval request, someone shares a sheet with you, all of those alerts will go to your Notifications tab. The Browse tab will hold all of the Smartsheet items that you create or items that have been shared to you. From this page, you can create new Smartsheet items, including sheets, reports, folders, and workspaces. When you create a new sheet, report, or dashboard, those items can be stored in one of two places: your Sheets folder or Workspaces. Your Sheets folder is something that I like to describe as your personal desktop. Anything that you create by default will automatically be saved to the Sheets folder unless you pick a different location. Also, when other collaborators share a sheet, report, or dashboard with you that does not live in a workspace, those items can be accessed through your Sheets folder as well. Workspaces are great when you need to share several items with the same group of people. It's a central place where you can store sheets, reports, dashboards, and templates to keep them organized. In a sense, workspaces are folders on steroids. Not only can you share entire workspaces with individuals or groups, but you can also set branding to that workspace so that it applies to all of your created sheets, and you can create folders within your workspaces for added organization. And while we're talking about sharing, let's talk about the different permission levels a collaborator can have on a Smartsheet item. Permission levels can be assigned to a collaborator at the workspace level or the individual Smartsheet item level. There are 4 permission levels: owner, admin, editor, and viewer. The owner of the item, in most cases, is the person that's created the item. So they have full control of the sheet or the workspace. Admins can modify the column layout for sheets and do almost anything an owner can do. Because of this, you want to make sure that you're really stringent with who you assign admin level permissions. Editors can edit sheets and add documents and comments, but they are not able to modify the layout of the columns. And lastly, viewers can view all of the contents of your sheet, but they do not have the ability to edit. Now that we've covered sheets, workspaces, and sharing permissions, let's talk about the other areas that make up the Browse tab. Work Apps is a no-code platform built directly into Smartsheet where you can build customized applications directly from your Smartsheet items, including external content like videos, slideshows, or files. What's great about work apps is that you can assign different roles for the collaborators that will be using the application. And this allows everyone to work from the same application, but each collaborator having a tailored experience based on their role assigned. And this feature is only available for those on the Enterprise or Premier Smartsheet plans. Next, we have resource views. A resource view provides a visual way to track and review how your team is allocated across projects that they're working on. So it's really supplemental to your decision making about your team's workloads, and you're able to visually see who's over allocated at any point in time. And finally, your deleted items. Now, when you delete a Smartsheet item, it doesn't get immediately deleted permanently. It first gets stored here in this tab. Deleted items stay here for 30 days, after which it gets permanently deleted. Now, personally, I never go into this folder. I shouldn't say never, but it's rare that I go into this folder. I just let it do its cleanup every 30 days. But you do have the option, if you're really OCD and need to keep things clean, you can always permanently delete items at any point in time. Another note is that items that are in your deleted items folder does not count towards your sheet limit. So you can have as many items on here and not have it impact your actual Smartsheet subscription. The next tab on our navigation pane is our recently opened items. And this list can contain up to 20 items that were recently opened. Next, our favorites tab. When you favorite a sheet, report, or dashboard, those items will be stored in your favorites tab. I always recommend favoriting Smartsheet items that you use on a day-to-day basis instead of searching or browsing for those items. The Solution Center is the primary place where you'll be creating new Smartsheet items. You can create new items from scratch, import either your Microsoft Excel, Microsoft Projects, Google Sheets, or Trello boards, or you can start by using one of the many templates that Smartsheet has available. If you've purchased add-ons with your Smartsheet subscription, such as Control Center or Data Mesh, you'd be able to access those add-ons from your Solution Center or from the launcher on your main navigation pane. Smartsheet has a great help and learning center where you can find learning resources and help articles on every single feature that's on the platform. There's also a great community of other Smartsheet users that you can connect with and ask them questions. I personally am in the community all the time, and I learn a ton of information from other Smartsheet users. And lastly, on the navigation pane is your account. This is where you'll manage your licenses, your users, and your personal settings. At this point, you're pretty much up to speed with how to navigate the Smartsheet platform. So let's dive into navigating a sheet. Now, some of these icons will be familiar to you if you've used something like Word or Excel. So I won't really cover what those icons mean, but I will touch on a few of the important features, or at least the ones that I think are important, that will help you get the most out of your use of Smartsheet. Your file menu is going to have typical options similar to what you would see in Word documents or Excel documents. You can create new items, import or open items, refresh your page, rename your sheet, and share, export, and print. One key feature on this menu is the Send as Attachment feature. This allows you to send the sheet in itself as an attachment to other collaborators through email. Another cool thing about sending as an attachment is that you can actually send it on a frequency. So you can set a daily, monthly, weekly email that goes to those collaborators that you set, and not having to worry about sending the same email all the time. Automation is where you'll create and manage all of your workflows. So automations such as sending update requests, setting a reminder, recording dates, all of this is managed and created under this tab. But we'll go over automation and creating workflows later on in the course. Forms enables you to create and manage user-friendly forms where internal or external users can add new rows to your sheet without having access to the sheet. So this is great for processes such as taking an intake for new projects, new IT requests, and so on. From this same pane, you can also rename your sheet, favorite the sheet, and share the sheet with other collaborators. In the second pane, you can toggle between different views that best suits the way that you work. The options available are grid, Gantt, card, which is also a Kanban, and calendar view. You can also create sheet filters, which we'll do later on in the course. Now, these filters can be shared with other users, or they can be personal filters that no other collaborators can see. You also have your outdent and indent icons here. This works similar to Microsoft Excel's grouping, where you can create sub-rows, which are child rows in the Smartsheet terminology, and parent rows. And of course, we have our formatting tools here to change the way your font looks like in your sheet, including your alignment, wrapping your text. If you want to clear out formats that you have on that row or cell, you can easily do that with Clear Formats. And of course, your format painter. Now, I love color coding. So conditional formatting is something that I use on almost every single sheet that I build for myself or clients. And this basically allows you to format your cells or rows based on certain criteria that you set. Like sheet filters, we'll go over and create conditional formatting later on in the course. Next to conditional formatting is your highlight changes icon. Now this you can toggle on and off at any time on the sheet, and this highlights changes on cells that have recently been changed. You do have the option to change the range of when those changes happen, either by the hour, the day, 3 days, or a custom date. And the last icon that I'll cover on this navigation pane is your cell linking. This feature allows you to link data from cells in other sheets that will update automatically to the sheet that you link it to. So as an example, if you have your project portfolio sheet where you manage all of your projects, but you also have separate project plans that manages the tasks within those projects, you can create a cell link from your % complete cell for your overall project completion and link it to your project portfolio sheet. So that way, when your project manager updates the project plan, that % complete also updates on your project portfolio. Now, the final navigation pane you'll see is on the right-hand side of the sheet. On this pane, you'll find conversations, attachments, proofs, update requests, publishing options, activity log, your sheet summary, and the 10,000-foot integration. In the Conversations tab, you can add comments to either a row or on the entire sheet. To add a comment to a specific row on your sheet, you'll hover your mouse over the row that you want to add the comment and click the comment bubble for that row. And you'll notice on the Conversations tab, you'll see that the row is referenced up top here. To add a comment to the sheet in itself, you'll toggle to the Sheet section in the Conversations tab and add a comment down below. To view all of your comments, both on the rows and on the sheet, you can toggle to the All section on the Conversations tab. Attachments work the same way as comments. You can add attachments to a specific row or on the sheet itself. You'll add attachments to a row, again by hovering over the row and clicking the paperclip icon. And again, you'll notice that your row has been referenced here. You can drag and drop a file from your computer, or you can click the button below to attach a file from any of these locations. To add an attachment to the sheet itself, you'll toggle to the Sheet tab and drag and drop the file directly here. Then, if you'd like to view all of the attachments on the rows or on the sheets, you'll click the All tab. Proofing allows your team to streamline and manage content creation and approval directly in Smartsheet. Anyone can easily review, edit, and approve images, videos, documents, and PDFs. It's also worth noting that proofing also integrates with Adobe Creative Cloud, so your users don't have to go back and forth between the apps. You can upload your file to a proof and send a review request to your colleagues, vendors, clients, and more, even if they're not shared to your sheet. Reviewers can pin comments, make annotations, discuss their feedback with each other, and log their approval decisions. You can upload a new version to the proof at any time to continue the process, and previous versions of the proof will remain available in view-only mode. Proofs are done on a row-by-row basis, so you can't add proofs to the entire sheet in itself. So like comments and attachments, you'll have to select the row that you want to add a proof to and click the proofing icon on the row. The Update Request tab aggregates all of your update requests on your sheet. You can use this window to send an update request to any collaborator and be able to see the actual status of that update request. Publishing a sheet, report, or dashboard generates a unique URL that anyone can access without logging into Smartsheet. Published items are dynamic, so it will continue to display the current data at the time. You have a few options in how you can publish your sheet, dashboard, or report, depending on the audience that you're publishing to. Not only does publishing generate a URL, but it also generates an embedding code that you can add to a website or on a dashboard. Your activity log is really your audit log of all of the changes that occurred on your sheet. You can filter by the action, collaborators, and a specific date range. And if you'd like, you can also download the activity log as a CSV file. The sheet summary is a great way to easily define, organize, and report on critical information in your sheet. We won't go too much into detail on this feature, but you can check out an upcoming course on 4 ways that we can use sheet summary in your processes. And finally, if your organization has 10,000 foot, this is where you can set up the Smartsheet integration. Integrating is a 2-step process to use the panel. First, you'll authorize your account, then you'll connect a project sheet to 10,000 foot. Once the sheet is connected, you can use the panel to see people or placeholders assigned to your task in your 10,000 foot project. You can also see overall allocation percentages for assigned users, overall availability for team members assigned to your project, and dates for overall project and individual assignments. Now that we've covered the basics of navigating the Smartsheet platform, let's jump into the next module and start creating our solution. The first thing we'll do is create our workspace. As we've covered in the previous module, you'll create all new items using the Create button in the top right corner. Give your workspace a name and then hit OK. Once the workspace is created, go ahead and jump in that workspace, and then we'll create our portfolio sheet. Again, you'll click the Create button on the top right corner and make sure that you are within your workspace. And we'll be creating a blank grid item. So go ahead and select Grid. Take the time to quickly name your sheet and hit OK to create it. Now that we have our blank grid sheet created, let's jump into that sheet and start building it. Now that you're in your blank grid sheet, you'll notice that there are some columns that have already been created for you. Every column in Smartsheet can be assigned a column type. By default, every new column that you add will be a text number column type. To change the column type, you'll double-click on a column header to view the column properties. From this window, you can name your column and choose the column type. While I did say that every column in a sheet can be set to a different column type, there is an exception to this, and that is the primary column. Now, this column is present in every sheet that you'll create in Smartsheet, but this can only be a text number column and it cannot be deleted. We'll be adding our columns to this sheet in 3 sections: project dates, project progression, and quarterly data. We'll use the primary column for our project name. So let's double click on that column header and rename the column. Now let's add our date columns. For our date columns, we'll be adding two sets of start and end date columns, one for planned and one for actual. Having these two sets of date columns will allow us to see when we planned on starting and ending a project and when we actually started and ended a project. We'll use the next four available columns to add those dates. So we'll double click on the next available column, name this planned start. And because what we'll be tracking in this column is going to be a date, we'll set the column type to date. If you want to ensure that only dates are being added to this column, you'll want to check off this restrict to dates only checkbox at the bottom of the window. This will prevent your collaborators from inputting TBD or any other erroneous text in this column. Then hit OK. Repeat these steps for the next three columns to add your planned end, actual start, and actual end columns. Now that we've added all of our date columns, we need to add our columns to track our project's progression. Now, obviously, we just have one available column left, so we'll need to add more. You can add columns to your sheet in two ways. The first way is to use the Insert Column icon on your sheet's toolbar. This will open the Insert Column window where you can name the column and set the column type like we did for the other columns. The second option is to right-click on any column header and select either Insert Column Left or Insert Column Right. You can also add multiple columns at a time by selecting a range of columns, then using your Insert Column icon or right-clicking on the column header and inserting left or right. When you're adding multiple columns to your sheet, the max amount of columns that you can add at one time is just 5. Now this works when you're adding columns and deleting columns from your sheet. With our newly added columns, let's add those columns to track our project progression. We'll be adding columns for the percent complete, days remaining, project health, project manager, and the project status. Because the data that we're tracking in the percent complete and days remaining columns are going to be numbers, we'll leave the column type as text number. The project health column will be our visual indicator for how that project is doing. So we'll select the symbols column type here. There are plenty of visual symbols here that you can use for this solution or other solutions that you build, but in this case, we'll be using the red, yellow, and green traffic lights. Like we did with the date columns, I want to make sure that only traffic lights are being inputted on this particular column. So I'll be restricting it to symbols only. Our project manager column is where we'll track who is assigned to the project. So we'll be using a contact list column type. In cases where you have multiple project managers or multiple people assigned to a specific project, you can check off this allow multiple contacts per cell when setting up the column. If you have a set list of contacts for this particular column, you can always add the email addresses to the value section here. This is completely optional, so you can always move forward without putting any values, and it'll work just fine. We'll be using the project status column to track whether the project has not started, it's in progress, or it's been complete. And we'll be using the drop-down column type, single select. Then we'll add our statuses in the values box. And of course, you do have the ability to restrict the drop-down values so that collaborators can only choose from these 3 values. Great, our project progression columns have now been added, so let's add our columns for quarterly data. We'll be using these columns to assign a quarter based on the project dates that we enter for the project. And we'll be using the drop-down single select column type for all 4 of those columns. These columns are going to be really helpful for giving a quarter-by-quarter analysis of how your team is performing in closing projects. The values we'll use for these columns will be Q1, Q2, Q3, and Q4. Now my values are going to be the same for the next 3 columns that I'm going to add. So I'm just going to copy and paste these values as I create those columns. All right, now that we have all of the columns that we need, let's move to the next module to start adding some formulas to our sheet. If your relationship to formulas are a little bit complicated, don't worry, all of the formulas that we're going to be building in this solution will be available to you in our course book. You'll be able to copy and paste the formulas from the course book directly to your sheet, or if you have some issues doing that, you can request access to my formula sheet where you can copy and paste the formulas from there. In this module, we'll be creating 3 sets of formulas. The first to calculate our days remaining for each project, the second to add a visual indicator for the project's health, and third, assigning a quarter based on the project dates. Now go ahead and click on the first cell of your days remaining column. Then enter the following formula that you see on your screen. Again, you can type this formula in or copy and paste it from the course book or the formula sheet. This formula will calculate the number of days between your planned end date and the current date. Now we don't want this column to calculate days remaining if the project is complete. So we've nested in another argument for our formula that basically says, don't calculate my days remaining if my percent complete is 100%. Now you may notice in this formula syntax that we're not referencing a specific cell for a column. Instead, we're using the @row function. Now this creates an efficient formula in your sheet, and it helps improve the overall performance of the sheet as well. In the same vein, we're using the same formula for the entire column, meaning when we add additional projects, the same formula will apply to that project as well. So once we have our formula in our cell, we're actually going to set this to a column formula. Go ahead, hit enter so that the formula gets populated in here. And don't mind the invalid data type error that you may see. This just means that the planned end date that I'm referring to does not have a date in here. Once you populate a date in here, that error goes away and it'll calculate as it should. To apply this formula that we just entered to the entire column, we'll select the cell that it's in and then right click. And all the way at the bottom of this menu, we'll click Convert to Column Formula. Again, this is going to apply the formula that we just created to the entire column. Once we set it to a column formula, this icon will appear on the column header, letting you know that there's a column level formula on this column. When you start adding your projects to this sheet and populating the planned end dates, you'll notice that your days remaining will either be a negative number or a positive number. A negative number indicates the days remaining until your planned end date, while a positive number will show the number of days after the planned end date. Now, I'm really territorial about my formulas in my sheets, and I want to make sure that none of my collaborators that have editor access is able to edit those formulas. So for every column that I build a formula in, I lock those columns. To lock a column, right-click on the column header and select Lock Column. This will prevent collaborators that have editor-level permissions on the sheet from making edits to this column. But remember, any collaborator that has an admin-level access will be able to edit these columns. So again, be very stringent with who you assign that access to. Let's add our next formula for the Project Health column. For our Project Health column, we'll be using the following formula to indicate whether the project is on track, at risk, or delayed. Just like our days remaining column, we don't want a visual indicator for projects that are completed. If you're new to formulas, this string of text probably doesn't make much sense to you. So in layman's terms, this formula translates into the following arguments. If the days remaining for a project is greater than 0, meaning we've already passed the planned end date, that project is delayed, so we'll see a red traffic light. If there is less than 20 days remaining until the planned end date, and the project completion is less than 90%, then we'll see a yellow indicator, meaning that the project is at risk. If none of the previous arguments apply, meaning the project is neither past due or at risk, then we'll see a green indicator, meaning that the project is on track. Now keep in mind, the at-risk criteria that we're using in this formula can't be changed based on what you consider at risk in your organization. So you can change the threshold of the number of days or the percent complete as you see fit. If you recall, when we set up this project health column, we restricted it to symbols only. And because what we've entered on that cell is technically text, this warning message will appear. As a sheet admin, or an owner in this case, we can go ahead and override this restriction. Go ahead and hit allow. Now that we have our formula in our first cell, let's go ahead and convert this to a column formula. Again, right-click on the cell and select Convert to Column Formula. For our quarter plan to start column, we'll be using this formula to calculate which quarter a project planned to start. Simply put, if the planned start month is between January and March, populate Q1. If the planned start month is between April and June, populate Q2. If it's between July and September, populate Q3. Otherwise, populate Q4. And as usual, we'll apply this formula to the entire column. We'll apply similar formulas to the remaining quarterly columns, but instead of referencing the planned start date as we did in this first column, we'll be referencing the planned end date for this column, the actual start date for this column, and the actual end date for this column. And at this point, you know the drill. Let's apply those formulas to the entire column. And let's remember to lock those columns. At this point, we have the basic structure for tracking our projects. Now you can take the time to add all of your projects to this sheet, add your project dates, percent complete, your assigned project manager, and your project statuses. As we're adding our project information, we want to make sure that our percent complete column is formatted correctly. If you notice, if I input a value in here, it's not a percentage value just yet. So go ahead and select the entire column, and we'll click this percentage icon in your toolbar. Now our column is set to a percentage value, so I'll update this to the appropriate percent complete of 90%. And as you continue adding your projects to get the sheet set up, you can go ahead and resize some of the columns so that they fit the data that they're tracking. Nice! Now all of your projects are on your portfolio sheet. In the next module, we'll be optimizing the sheet and adding some automations around your processes. Conditional formatting is a great way to add additional visual cues to your project sheet. In this module, we'll be creating conditional formatting rules to call attention to key project data, specifically our project health and project status columns. To get started with creating conditional formatting rules, you'll click on the conditional formatting icon on your toolbar. There are three parts to a conditional formatting rule: the condition, the formatting style, and where the formatting style is being applied. The first set of rules that we'll create will be related to the project status column. I want to add color codes for each project based on what status they're currently in. If a project is not started, I want to color that project status light gray. If it's in progress, I'll color code it a light blue. And if it's complete, I'll color code it in a light green color. So let's start with our first rule. Click Add New Rule, and let's set the condition. We'll select Project Status, and in the second window, select Not Started. Then hit OK. Now we'll set our formatting style. Click this format, and we'll select the paint bucket and choose a light gray color. Now I only want this formatting to be applied to my project status column. So I'll select the entire row link here, and I'll scroll down to my project status column. Select that and hit OK. Now let's add our second rule for our in-progress projects. Again, you'll hit Add New Rule, or you can create a duplicate of the rule that we just created and make updates to that duplicated rule. To duplicate an existing rule, you'll click on the triangle icon and then select Clone Rule. Again, we'll update our condition. We'll uncheck Not Started and select In Progress. Then let's update the format to a light blue color. Now let's add our last project status rule. Looking good. Let's hit OK to see what that looks like on our sheet so far. Great, all of our conditional formatting has now been applied to all of our project statuses. Now let's add some rules related to our project health. The formatting style that we'll use in these rules are going to match up to the traffic lights in our project health column. So let's jump into the conditional formatting window and hit Add New Rule. Like our previous three rules, we'll set the condition and we'll select the project health column. And let's start with our delayed projects. So we'll select red. For our formatting style, I like to bold the text and make the font red. Then I'll update my taskbar color. The taskbar is related to the bars that you'll see when you switch over to the Gantt view on the sheet. This will also be really important when we build our dashboard. And for this rule, we'll leave the formatting location for the entire row. Now let's duplicate this rule for the remaining two rules that we need. All right, we're all set here. At this point, you are free to add additional formatting rules as you see fit. Keep in mind that your higher rules take priority over your lower rules. That being said, if there's a rule that you'd like to take higher priority over another rule, you can quickly rearrange them by clicking and dragging in the gray area of the rule. Now let's hit OK and see our formatting in full view. Now that we have our formatting up and running, let's move on to the next module to continue optimizing our sheet. Sheet filters are probably the simplest way to optimize your sheet. For example, you can use a filter to see all of the projects that are planned to start in Q1. You can also create a filter that dynamically changes based on who is viewing the sheet at the time. This is an example of a current user filter. You may want to set up a filter where Jordan, a project manager on your team, will be able to see all of the projects that are assigned to them. The filter will update automatically for Amanda, another project manager on your team, who is also viewing the sheet. Anyone that has access to a sheet can create a filter for themselves. Additionally, Sheet owners or admins can create and share a filter with all collaborators on the sheet. The filters that we'll create in this module include at-risk projects, delayed projects, and open projects assigned to me, or a current user filter. To get started, click the filter button on your toolbar. And we'll name this at-risk projects. Then we'll check the Share Filter checkbox right next to it. This will share the filter to all of the collaborators shared to the sheet. Now let's add our filter condition. In this case, we only want to see those projects that are at risk, or where the project health is yellow. So we'll select the project health field. We'll leave our middle field as is. And in the third field, we'll select yellow. Then hit apply. Now you can see that the filter is applied to the sheet and we can only see those projects that are at risk. Let's create our second filter for our delayed projects. Click on the triangle icon on your filter button and we'll select New Filter. Again, go ahead and name your filter. And check off your Share Filter checkbox. Now let's add our condition for this delayed projects filter. Again, we'll select the project's health, leave the middle box as is, and select red from the third field. Then hit apply. And again, the only projects that we'll see are those delayed projects. Now let's add our last filter, which will be the current user filter. We'll be using multiple criteria for this particular filter. The first, where the project manager is the current user and the project status is in progress. That way, when project managers are on the sheet and they apply that filter, they'll only see their in progress projects related to them. Go ahead and hit New Filter. And let's name this In Progress Projects Assigned to Me. And of course, select Share Filter. As mentioned earlier, we'll be adding two conditions for this filter. Our first condition will be related to the Project Manager column. So we'll select Project Manager, and we'll leave our middle criteria as is. And in the third dropdown, we'll select Current User. For our second condition, we only want to show those projects that are in progress. So we'll select our project status column, leave our middle field as is, and we'll select in progress in the third field. When you have filters that have multiple conditions, you have the option to show rows that either match all of the conditions that you choose or at least one condition that you set. To toggle between all conditions or at least one, you'll just click on the All Conditions hyperlink here. In this case, I want to show all rows that match all conditions. So I'll toggle this back to all conditions and then hit apply. You can now take this time to add any additional filters that you see fit for your team. Quick question for you. How many emails do you send on a weekly basis asking for updates on projects? How much time does that take you? With automation workflows, you can let Smartsheet do the hard work for you. We'll be using automation workflows to reduce the need to chase team members for project updates and notify other team members of key project changes. In this module, we'll be creating 3 workflows. The first, to notify a project manager when they're assigned to a project. The second, to send a weekly update request to the assigned project manager for updates on their project. And the third, to notify a team member when a project becomes at risk or delayed. All workflows are created and managed in the Automation tab on the sheet. You can start off with a completely blank workflow or start with the pre-populated workflow available to you here. The workflows that we'll create in this module will be starting with a blank workflow, but feel free to use the pre-populated workflows as you add additional ones later on. Automation workflows are comprised of three components: the trigger, condition, and action. All workflows are required to have a trigger and an action, but having a condition is completely optional. Triggers can be based on dates or when rows are added or changed. You can set one or more conditions around any column on the sheet that trigger a specified action if conditions are met. The actions available can either be internal Smartsheet actions, like alerting someone or requesting an approval, or external actions like an alert to a Slack channel or Microsoft Teams channel. The first thing you'll want to do is name your workflow. When you're naming your workflows, you want to be specific when naming them. Doing so is especially helpful when you have several workflows built. The first workflow that we'll be building will be to notify a project manager when they're assigned to a project. So I'll go ahead and name this workflow Notify PM when assigned. Now that we have our workflow named, let's move to our trigger. When you start a workflow from scratch, your trigger is always going to default to when rows are added or changed. But if you click on the drop-down list, you'll see that there are other triggers available to you. For this particular workflow, we'll leave the trigger as is. Now let's add some criteria for our trigger. In this case, we want to be notified when the project manager column changes. So we'll select the project manager column from this drop-down list. I also want the project manager to be notified immediately when this change happens. So we'll leave this section of the trigger as is. In cases where changes happen a lot on the sheet, you can always reduce the frequency of when workflows are triggered. When you come into this drop-down list here, you can see all of the frequencies that you have available. For this workflow, we don't have a condition that applies in this case, so we'll skip right over to the action block. In our action block, we'll be alerting someone of this particular change. So we'll select Alert Someone. For alert actions, you have the ability to customize recipients of these notifications. If you drop into this drop-down list, you can see all of the recipients that you can customize. In this case, I want the recipient to be whoever's assigned in the project manager column. So I'll be selecting Send Contacts in a cell. Then we'll select the project manager contact field. From here, you may want to update your permission settings for this workflow. The permission settings control who can receive notifications and requests from this specific sheet. You can choose a restricted permission level, meaning that only the collaborators that are shared to this sheet will receive those alerts. A limited permission level allows collaborators on the sheet or users in the same account as a sheet owner to receive these alerts. The unrestricted permission levels opens up notifications to third-party apps and any email address that you input as a recipient. If you're creating workflows where the recipients may be an external person, I tend to lean more towards the unrestricted permission level, just to accommodate those users that may be external team members to my client's organization. Now that we have our recipients set for this workflow, let's customize the message that they'll receive. From here, you can add a subject and a message body, just like an email. If you want to add specific sheet content to your message or body, for example, a project start date or the project name, you can add the field name in double curly brackets to add that information in. So if I wanted to add the project name to my subject, I'll add my double curly brackets and input the column name, which is project name. You can also set your email alert to include links to the sheet and column fields. If you want to include all of the fields, you'll select links to sheet and all fields. If there are specific fields that you want the recipient to see, you'd select the second option. From here, you'll select all of the columns that you want to include in the alert. If you don't want to include any links to the sheet or any fields, you'll select Message Only. Now that we have our action block fully completed, let's save this workflow. Now we have our very first automation workflow. You can also manage specific workflows from your automation window. When you hover over the workflow that you want to manage, you'll click on the triangle icon here. From here, you can disable, edit, duplicate, unsubscribe, or delete a workflow. Now let's build our second workflow, where we'll be sending a weekly update request to the assigned project manager for updates on the projects. Now you can either duplicate the first rule that we created and update that workflow, or you can create a blank workflow. Now I promised I would start at blank workflows in this module, so I'll hit create up top. First, we'll name this workflow weekly update request to project manager. Then we'll be changing our trigger to when a date is reached. Now, because I want this workflow to run on a weekly basis, I'll update this run once dropdown to custom. From here, you can set your custom recurrence for this workflow. Again, this is going to be a weekly update request, but you can see that you have a daily, monthly, and yearly option for their recurrence. I also like to get my updates at the end of the week, so I'll leave this as Friday. But of course, you do have the option to change what day this weekly update goes out to your project managers. I also want this workflow to start immediately after I create it, so I'll leave this as today's date. I also don't have an end date in mind, so I'll just keep this workflow going on forever. Now I'll hit done. In addition to customizing the frequency of your triggers, you can also customize the time that your recipients receive the update request. I think 3 p.m. on a Friday is a little bit late, so I'll update this time to 9 a.m. Now let's go ahead and add some conditions to this workflow. We don't want this workflow to trigger on projects that haven't started or are already completed. So we'll select the project status column. We'll keep is one of as is. And from our drop-down menu, we'll select in progress. This means our project managers are only going to receive these notifications for projects that are in progress. For our action, because we're asking for an update from the recipient, we'll select the request and update option here. Like we did in our previous workflow, we'll change the recipient to contacts in a cell and again select our project manager column. Now that you have your recipient set, go ahead and take the time to customize your message. Add a subject, message body, and the following fields to include in the update request. The last workflow that we'll build will be notifying a team member when a project becomes at risk or delayed. Again, we'll start with a blank workflow, and let's name this workflow At Risk and Delayed Projects Alert. We'll go ahead and leave our trigger as is when roles are added or changed, and we'll select the project health column from this drop-down list. Then we'll select the red and yellow options from the drop-down list. And of course, this is going to be an alert notification, so we'll select alert someone. Now we'll be sending this alert to specific people, so we'll leave this option as is. I'll leave myself on here because I want to be notified of these changes, but I also want to add my ops manager to this notification as well. So I'll click the recipient field here and add an additional recipient. And as usual, go ahead and take this time to customize your message, adding a subject and message body, and whether or not you'd like that message to include links to your sheet and specific columns. Once you've finalized this workflow, feel free to take the time to create additional workflows that will work for you and your team. Once done, we can move on to the next module. Smartsheet reports allow you to compile information from multiple sheets and only show the rows that meet the criteria that you specify. Similar to a sheet, a report can be sent, shared, and published. In this module, we'll be creating a Smartsheet report that will list out all of our projects on our project portfolio sheet. Then we'll display the report on our dashboard that we'll build later. Back in our workspace, we'll create a report by clicking the Create button on the top right corner. Then select Report. Now let's name the report. I'll simply name mine Projects Report. As you can see, there are two different report types that you can choose from, a row report and a sheet summary report. In this case, we want to stick with the row report selection. Row reports aggregate row information from multiple sheets, whereas a sheet summary report aggregates sheet summary fields from multiple sheets. When creating a new report in Smartsheet, the platform will navigate you through the steps required to generate the report. First, you'll select your source sheets. For this report, we just have one source sheet, which is our project portfolio sheet. But keep in mind, you can add additional source sheets for other reports that you create. Using the search bar, I'll search for our project portfolio sheet. Then hit Next. The second step is where you'll select the columns that you want to display on the report. As you can see, all of the columns that we created on our project portfolio sheet is displayed on this menu. So let's go through all of the options and select the columns that will be most valuable on our report, which will then show up on our dashboard. Once you've selected all of the columns that you want to display on the report, click Next. The third step when creating a report is to specify the criteria. This is where you'll refine what rows appear on the report. For this particular report, I want to display all of the projects that are on the portfolio sheet. So we won't be specifying any criteria in this case. But let's walk through the steps that you'll take if you wanted to add criteria to a report. Let's say that you only wanted to display those projects where the status was in progress. In the first drop-down menu, you'd select the column. In this case, it would be the project status column. In the second drop-down menu, you'd select the argument for your condition. Because we want to show the projects where the project status is in progress, we'll select is one of as the argument. Then in the third drop-down menu, you'll select the in progress status. Then hit OK to apply. As you can see, the report builder generates only the rows where the project status is in progress. If you have more than one criteria that you'd like to apply to the report, you can add conditions and specify the criteria for each condition. And just like our sheet filters that we discussed earlier on in the course, you do have the option to choose whether rows are aggregated if they meet all of the criteria that you specify or at least one condition is met. If you want all of your conditions to be met, you'll keep the AND option selected here. If you want rows aggregated if they meet at least one condition, you'll change this option from AND to OR. Let's add another condition so you can see it in action. Let's say that I not only want to see those projects that are in progress, but I'd like to also see those projects that are starting in the next 60 days. In my first drop-down menu, I'll select my Planned Start column. In my second drop-down menu, I'll select is in the next days argument. Finally, for my value, I'll input 60, then hit OK to apply. As you can see, the report has been updated to include one more project based on the criteria that I specified. Now that you're up to speed with how report filters work, I'm going to go ahead and remove these filters. Again, none of the filters that I've created here will apply to this report that we'll display on the dashboard. At this point, let's take some time to format our report so that the columns match the size of the data that's being displayed. We'll also rearrange some of the columns so that the order of where the columns are makes sense for our audience. By default, the sheet name column will appear in every report that you create. Having this column is completely optional. And while it will allow ease of access to the source sheet for audiences looking at your dashboard, in this case, I really don't see a value of having this column for this report, so I'll go ahead and remove it. I'll right-click on the header name and select Remove Column. You'll notice the column header for our project name just says Primary. This is by default when you're creating a report. Back when we created our portfolio sheet, our project name column is actually our primary column in the sheet. So when you're building reports, the name that you choose in your source sheet does not carry over into reports. This is because you can build reports off of multiple sheets where the primary column could be named differently across those sheets. So by default, it'll just say primary. The good news is we can rename this column in the report to a header that makes most sense. Quickly double click on the column header and let's rename this project name. So far, our report is looking great, but let's make it a little bit easier for our audience to digest. You can see that all of the rows are in the same order as it is in the project portfolio sheet, but I like to group these based on the project status to add more focus to what I'm looking at. In the top toolbar, click the group icon here. And again, I want to group by the project status. So I'll select from my drop-down menu, the project status column. From here, you can decide whether you'd like to sort ascending or descending. For this grouping, I'll select the sort descending option because I don't want my completed projects to show up at the top of my report. Then click OK to apply. As you can see, all of my projects are being grouped by its respective project status. Just like the report criteria that we did earlier, you can group the report by multiple columns. So let's say that I wanted to add another grouping layer by the project health column. Click on your grouping icon and then select Group by Another column. In my drop-down menu, I'll select the project health column. Then hit OK. With our additional grouping criteria, we can see another layer of groups in our report. Based on the metrics that we'll be displaying on our dashboard, the main focus is the project health column, making sure that our projects are being completed on time. So instead of grouping by the project status, I'll just group this report by the project health. So in my Groups tab, I'll just delete this project status layer, then hit OK to apply. Now the report is regrouped in a way where we can focus on the project health. From here, you have the option to add some analysis to the report using the Summarize icon. This will help you define key metrics needed to make decisions when you're meeting with your team. You can summarize almost any column on your report, and depending on the column type that you select to summarize, you'll have a few options of what type of analysis you can use. As an example, let's summarize two columns, the project health and the percent complete column. For my project health, I'd like to know the number of projects that fall into the 3 project health buckets. So in my first drop-down menu, I'll select the project health option. For this column type, the only option that I have for analysis is count. So I'll leave this as is. Let's hit OK to apply. As you can see, my project health column now has some analyzed data showing me the total projects that I have in my report and the number of projects for each of my project health buckets. Now let's add our second summary for our percent complete column. Click Summarize Another Column and select the percent complete column. In my second drop-down field, I'd like to know the average percent complete for each of my project health buckets. So I'll select Average, then hit OK to apply. Just like my project health column, I can see the average percent complete for all of my projects and the projects for each project health bucket. If these summaries are valuable to you when you're building your dashboard, you can go ahead and leave them on here. But for me, I think I'll remove this summary for the project health column because we're already highlighting that data in our summary section. The last thing that we'll do configuring this report for our dashboard will be to update the view. On my dashboard, I not only want to see the listing of the projects, but I also want to see a Gantt chart for this report. So on my report toolbar, I'll change the grid view to Gantt view. With the Gantt view enabled, we can now see a taskbar for each of our projects listed. Earlier, we created conditional formatting rules on our project portfolio sheet that will color the taskbar depending on what the project health is. So now you can finally see it in action. Right now, the taskbars that are being displayed on the Gantt view is based on our planned start and planned end columns. I'd also like to add a visual indicator of the percent completion for all of the projects. We'll add this visual indicator by clicking the settings gear in the top right corner. As mentioned, the date range displayed for our taskbars are based on the planned start and planned end column. In my percent complete column, I'll select percent complete to add that visual indicator to each of my projects. You can also change the timeline display of your Gantt in two ways. The first, by using the zoom in and zoom out icons that's next to the project settings icon. Right now, this is showing a weekly timeline display. If we zoom out once, it will then show us a monthly timeline display. Zooming out again will give you a quarterly timeline display, and once more will give you a yearly timeline display. The second way to change the timeline display will be in your project settings. In the project settings window, you'll select the timeline display tab. From here, you can update the primary heading, secondary heading, what day you'd like to start for the week, the start of the fiscal year, and the display label for the taskbar. If you'd like the Gantt chart to open to today's date, you would check this box. Otherwise, when the Gantt view is opened, it will automatically open to the earliest start date in your report. At this point, our report is all set for our dashboard. Take a minute to save your report and let's move on to the next module. All right, everything is coming together. Now it's time to create the metric sheet. Now the metric sheet is going to be the driver for the dashboard that we'll create later on in the course. Earlier in the course, we talked about using these metrics for our dashboard. Now the reason why we're creating a separate metric sheet for our dashboard metrics rather than building them in our portfolio sheet is to keep the portfolio sheet clean. Additionally, having our dashboard metrics on a separate sheet allows us to easily add additional metrics later on. If you find that you're using a lot of metrics for your dashboard, or your one metric sheet will be feeding into multiple dashboards, it's a good idea to create sections within the metric sheet. This not only keeps your metric sheet organized, but it also makes it a lot easier to navigate the sheet in cases where you need to make updates to any of the formulas. Here's an example of a metric sheet that not only has a lot of metrics, but it also feeds into multiple dashboards. So you can really appreciate the need for adding those sections for each of your data sets. Now let's go ahead and create a blank grid sheet for our metrics. Click Create in the top right corner and select Grid. Now let's name this sheet Project Dashboard Metrics. The three sections that we'll be creating in our metric sheet will be the summary, project start metrics, and project end metrics. Now keep in mind the last two sections will be highlighting our quarterly project data. Now that we have our section headers, let's go ahead and space these rows out to accommodate the metrics that we'll create. In our summary section, we'll be creating metrics that will give us the number of projects by each status, not started, in progress, and complete. Additionally, we'll create metrics that will give us the number of projects by the project health. on track, at risk, and delayed. So let's go ahead and add these subsections to our summary section. The first will be projects by status. Then projects by health. Now for each of these sections, we'll be using 3 additional rows. So let's go ahead and move this row to accommodate the 3 rows that we need. Great. Under our projects by status section, let's add our 3 project statuses: not started, in progress, and complete. Then for our projects by health section, we'll add our 3 health statuses: on track, at risk, and delayed. All right, now that we've saved, let's go ahead and start grouping these sections by creating parent-child rows. First, let's select our 3 project statuses and click the indent icon on the toolbar. Let's do the same for projects by health. Now we have our 2 subsections for our summary section. At this point, we'll indent these 2 sections to our summary row. Now let's move on to our project start metrics section. Here we'll create metrics that will calculate the number of projects planned and actually started by each quarter, as well as the on-time start rate. Now, like we did in our previous section, let's go ahead and indent these rows to our parent row here. For the final section, our project end metrics, we'll be using similar metrics as we did in our project start section: the number of projects planned and actually ended by each quarter, as well as the on-time completion rate. Because these metrics are similar to our previous section, I'll just go ahead and copy and paste what I typed earlier and just replace any reference to start and change that to end. And go ahead and indent those rows. Perfect. Let's quickly save our sheet and continue building our metrics. Before we start building these formulas, let's go ahead and format our sections just so we have a visual indicator of where a section starts and where it ends. I'm going to start off by formatting our main metric section. So I'll right-click on the primary column and click Collapse All. Then from here, I'll just highlight my 3 sections and I'll just add some bold font and a background color. And I can't really see this black text, so I'll change this to white text. Now let's expand all of our sections. Like we did earlier, go ahead and right-click the primary column and select Expand All. For my 2 subsections in my summary section, I think I'll just bold these rows. For our project start and project end metric sections, we need to add some indicators for each quarter. So in the next 4 columns, we'll be adding Q1 through 4 to our 2 parent rows for each section. Now we'll quickly center the text, then copy from this row and paste it to our second section. Great, now our structure of our metric sheet is in place. So we can start building our formulas. Now, when we're building our formulas for our metrics, we'll be referencing a completely different sheet. In other words, our project portfolio sheet. So we'll need to create some cross-sheet references. Now, with your cursor on any cell in the sheet, go ahead and right-click to access the cell menu. In the cell menu, click Manage References. This will open up the Sheet Reference Manager. This is where we can create and manage all of the cross-sheet references, as well as any cell link references that we may add. Under Cross-Sheet References, click Create. When we're referencing another sheet, there are 3 actions that we need to take. The first is to select a data source. In this case, that will be our project portfolio sheet. We'll then name our sheet reference, then select the column that we'll be using in the reference. So let's find our project portfolio sheet. Now, the first reference that we'll create will be our project status. So let's update the sheet reference name to status. Then you'll want to click on the project status column to set the reference. Then insert reference. Now let's jump back into our Sheet Reference Manager. And you can see that our status reference has been created. Now let's go ahead and create the reference for our project health. Here you'll notice that our project portfolio sheet has already been selected. So now all we have to do is rename the reference, and we'll name this Health. Then select the Project Health column. Then insert reference. Again, let's go back into our Sheet Reference Manager, and we see that our health reference has been created. From here, we'll be adding 4 additional references for our quarterly data. 1 for projects planned to start, the 2nd for projects actually started, the 3rd projects planned to end, and the 4th projects actually ended. So let's name our reference Plan to Start. Then select the Quarter Plan to Start column. Next up, we have Planned to End. Our 3rd one, Actually Started. And our last one, Actually Ended. Now we have all of our cross-sheet references created for this sheet. So at this point, we can move forward with creating our formulas. In the 2nd column next to our Not Started metric, we'll be inputting the following formula. In other words, a project will be counted if the status is not started. To use a cross-sheet reference that we created earlier, you'll surround the reference name with curly brackets. So in this case, we'll be using the status cross-sheet reference. And because our metrics match the actual status that we're using in the project portfolio, we'll just go ahead and reference this cell in the formula. We'll be using the exact same formula for in progress and complete metrics. And since this formula references the primary column for that given row, we can just copy and paste or drag and drop the formulas to the remaining 2 rows. And as you can see, this formula automatically references the data that's in the primary column for each metric. Now let's move on to the projects by health metrics. If you remember, when we were building our project portfolio, we only assigned health traffic lights to those projects that were in progress. So when we're building our formulas, we'll be using a count ifs formula to count those projects that are not only in progress, but also on track at risk, or delayed. For our on-track metric, we'll be using the following formula. The first argument set in this formula will be projects that are in progress. So we'll add our status cross-reference with the criterion of in progress. Then we'll add our second argument referencing the project health reference. So we'll add our health reference. And here our criterion will be green to match the green traffic light that's assigned for on-track projects. From here, we can copy and paste the formula that we just created into our remaining two metrics and just update the criterion for the project health. So for our at-risk formula, double-click into the cell and update green to yellow. And for the delayed, we'll update green to red. Now that we have our summary section completed, let's move on to our project start metric section. Now, when we're building the formulas in this section, we only want to count those projects where the start date is in the current year. This way, we're accommodating those projects that could have started a previous year that we don't want to count in these metrics. So far, we've built cross-sheet references for our project status, project health, and our quarterly data columns. But because we'll be referencing our project date columns, we'll need to add additional cross-sheet references for this data set. Let's jump into our Sheet Reference Manager to create our start date references. If your portfolio sheet is not selected as a data source, go ahead and search for it and then select it. Let's name our first reference Plan Start. And select the Plan Start column. Now let's add the cross-sheet reference for our actual start date column. Now that we have our additional references, let's start building these formulas. For our projects planned to start in Q1, we'll be using the following formula. Now I know this formula is a little bit long. You might be taken aback, especially if you're not familiar with formulas. This is a perfect time where you can copy and paste the formula from the course book or request access to the dashboard metrics sheet. Essentially, this formula is calculating the number of projects where the planned start date is in the current year and if that start date is in Q1. Now we'll be using the same formula that we built here for the remaining quarters. We'll just be updating the criterion for each respective quarter. So we'll apply this formula, drag it to the remaining three columns, then we'll double click in our Q2 metric and we'll update the quarter criterion from Q1 and change it to Q2. And we'll do the same for Q3 and Q4. For our second metric in this section, we'll be using a similar formula that we did for plan to start, but in this case, our cross-sheet references will be a little bit different. In our cell for projects actually started for Q1, we'll be using the following formula. Again, if you're not familiar with building formulas, copy and paste from the course book or request access to the formula sheet in Smartsheet. Now again, because the formula that we're using here is similar to what we did before, we can just copy and paste our first formula for Q1 and just update the references as needed. So I'll just double click in my cell for plan to start Q1 and select all of the text, and I'll go ahead and copy this. Then I'll double click in my second cell for actually started for Q1 and then paste the formula in here. So here I'll update my planned start reference, and I'll change that to actual start. In my second cross sheet reference, I'll update this from planned to start to actually started. And hit enter. Now from here, we'll apply this formula to the remaining 3 columns and update the criterion for the quarterly data. So again, we'll change Q1 to Q2, and we'll do the same for Q3 and 4. We'll be calculating the on-time start rate by dividing the projects actually started by the project's plan to start values. So in our first cell for Q1, we'll be using the following formula. And here we're using the if error function to accommodate those scenarios where your calculating values are 0. If we don't use an if error function when calculating this metric, we'll end up with a divide by 0 error, which will not map on our dashboard. All our if error function is doing is replacing the error that we'll possibly get with the 0 value. When we're creating our charts for our dashboard, we'll see a 0 value mapped on the chart. Again, we'll be using the exact same formula for the remaining quarters. So we'll drag this formula to the remaining 3 columns. Now our on-time start rate metric should be displayed as a percentage value. So let's change the formatting of these values to a percent format. We already have our cells highlighted, so now you can go ahead and click the percentage icon on your toolbar. For our project end metrics, we'll be using the same formulas that we used in our project start metrics section. But because we're referencing our project end dates, our cross-sheet references will be different. Now we had to add additional cross-sheet references for our project start dates. Now let's add the additional references for our project end dates. Let's jump into that sheet reference manager, and we'll create our planned end reference. Great, now let's add our actual end date reference. Now that we have our cross-sheet references for our project end dates, let's take a shortcut to add all of the formulas for this section. Let's select all of the cells in our previous data set, use your keyboard shortcut to copy, or right-click anywhere in the selected data set and click Copy. Then select the first cell in your second data set and use your keyboard shortcut to paste, or right-click on the cell and select Paste. Now from here, we'll just go into each of our formulas for this section and update any reference to our start dates and change them to our end date references. So our first cross-sheet reference here, I'll update planned start to planned end, and I'll do the same thing for the second reference at the end. And honestly, I don't like retyping things, so I'll just copy and paste end wherever I see fit. And we'll do the same thing for our project's actually ended metrics. Update actual start to actual end, and actually started to actually ended. And you'll notice that we don't need to make any updates to our on-time completion rate formulas. It already references our projects actually ended, and projects planned to end values. Now at this point, our metric sheet is complete and we're ready to start building our dashboard. If you'd like, you can always format our metric values to a centered alignment just so it looks aesthetically pleasing. Awesome. Now our formatting is complete, so let's move on to the next module. Finally, we're at the fun part. You've done such a good job building your solution thus far. Back in our workspace, let's create our dashboard. Like we always do, click the Create button on the top right corner. Then select Dashboard. Now name your dashboard and click OK. Before we start visualizing our data, let's talk about the building blocks of dashboards, widgets. There are several widget options that you have to build your dashboard. You can view all of the available widgets by clicking the Add Widget button. On the right-hand side of your browser, you'll see the Add Widget tab appear with all of the widget types you have available: a metric, chart, shortcut, report, title, rich text, web content, and image. In this module, we'll be using all of the widget types available except for the web content widget type. With the exception of the web content widget, all of the widgets on your dashboard can be either static or interactive. Meaning, when you add a widget to your dashboard, you can give your audience the ability to click on a widget and be redirected to another Smartsheet item or an external URL. We'll go over that later on in the course when we start building our dashboard. To ensure you have an effective and digestible dashboard, you'd want to consider these helpful tips. The first, provide context. Just having numbers on your dashboard doesn't tell your audience the full story. Include descriptions, name your axes, and add chart titles that your audience will understand. The second, use interactive elements. Just like we've mentioned earlier, giving your audience the ability to drill down on data gives your story more depth. Providing links to sheets or reports give additional information when your audience wants it without bogging down the dashboard. And third, keep it simple. The story your dashboard tells should be concise, and the layout should be clean and easy to read. Stick to a few colors, make sure font is legible, and ensure that charts are big enough to see. Here's a preview of the final product that you'll have when we finish building our dashboard. Just like we did when creating our metric sheet, we'll tackle adding our widgets in sections. We'll first create all of our widgets at one time, and then at the end, we'll rearrange our widgets to the layout that best fits our audience. First, let's add our company logo to the dashboard. Click on the image widget type. All of the updates and configuration for your widgets will be in the right navigation pane of your browser. To add an image to this image widget, click the Select Image button. From here, you can choose a file from your computer, Google Drive, Box, Dropbox, or OneDrive. Now, I don't want this title bar to appear on this widget, so I'll go to the Title section and toggle off the Show Title option. As I mentioned in the beginning of this module, widgets can be made static or interactive. Making a widget interactive is all done in the Widget Behavior section. From the drop-down menu, you have the option to take no action, open another site, or open a Smartsheet item when someone clicks on that particular widget. I'd like my audience to be redirected to my Impressed Boss website when they click on this image widget. So I'll select Open Another Site. From here, I'll input the Impressed Boss website in the URL field. This widget is all set, so I'll click anywhere on my dashboard canvas to exit the widget settings. Right now, this widget is pretty big and I know I won't need it this size. So I'll quickly resize it so it takes up less space on my canvas. Now let's add our dashboard title widget. On the far right side of your browser, click the plus icon to add another widget. Again, you'll see the Add Widget tab appear. Then select the title widget type. Click on the inside of the widget to add a title. Now that we have our title, let's add a background color and change the font color. To change the background color of this title widget, click on the down pointing arrow next to the paint bucket icon. You have the option of choosing the standard Smartsheet colors or adding your own custom colors. None of the standard colors fit my branding, so I'll go ahead and add a custom color. From here, you can manually choose a color using the color picker, or if you already have a hex code or RGB code, you can input that at the bottom. To change the font color, double-click inside the widget once again, highlight the text that's in your widget, then select the down-pointing arrow next to the font color icon. Again, you have the option of choosing standard Smartsheet colors or adding a custom color. Let's see what white font looks like against my colored background. This looks a little bit washed out, so I think I'll change the background color to a darker color. Again, I'll double click inside of my widget, select the down pointing arrow next to my color bucket, and add another custom color. Much better. Now let's add our first chart widget. Again, click on the plus icon to add a widget and select chart. The very first thing you'll do when adding a chart widget is to add your data set. Click the Add Data button, then search and select the project dashboard metric sheet that we created in the previous module. Our first chart will be a breakdown of the projects by status. So you'll select the cells where you've entered the statuses and the values. Once selected, click OK. Now that the chart has been generated with our data set, let's configure the chart even further. While I like the look of a pie chart for this data set, I'm pretty biased to the look of a donut chart type. So in my chart type dropdown, I'll change the pie option to the donut option. Next, I'll update my title to something that matches the data that I'm showing. So I'll change this title to Projects by Status. Now that we have our title, let's move to the next section to update the colors on the chart to match the conditional formatting rules that we set in our project portfolio sheet. In the Pie Chart and Series tab, you have the option to display your chart as a semicircle or update how the value labels are presented. You can choose between the percentage or the amount or hide the values altogether. In this case, I want my value labels to be the amount, meaning that it'll show the actual number of projects for each status. Now, I'll update my pie chart colors to match those conditional formatting rules we created earlier. So for not started, I'll choose the color gray, in progress, blue, and complete, green. Now that our chart colors have been selected, I want to move the position of the chart legend. So in the legend section, I'll update my legend position from right to left. You can also change the styling of the legend to make it even more legible for your audience. You can change the font size, make the font bold, italicized, or change the color. Feel free to make any styling changes as you see fit. If you wanted to add an interactive element to this widget, like we did in our image widget, you'll make that configuration in the widget behavior section. For right now, I'm okay with nothing happening when someone clicks the widget. Now you'll notice that the styling of the chart title by default has a background color of gray, the font is black, and it's left aligned. To change the styling of your chart title, click on the widget, then click once on the title. You'll then notice a styling toolbar appears. From here, you can change the font size, bold, italicize, underline or strike through the text, change the font color, change the background color, and update the alignment for your text. The only thing that I'll change here for my title is the background color and the alignment. Like our title widget, I'll select the down arrow next to the paint bucket. Then I'll select my custom color. Then I'll select the center alignment for my title. Now this widget is all set. I'll go ahead and just move this over so I can have more room to add my second widget. My second widget will be highlighting projects by health. This will also be a pie chart, so you can either start from scratch adding a new widget altogether, or you can copy the widget that we just created. To copy a widget, hover over the widget that you want to copy. You'll see an ellipses icon in the top right corner of the widget. Click on that icon to access the widget settings. From here, you can edit, delete, cut, copy, or paste. Let's go ahead and copy this widget. With the widget copied, click anywhere on your blank dashboard canvas. Then, right-click on the area that you'd want to paste the widget that you copied. Then select Paste Here. Now let's update the data set that this chart is highlighting. Click on the widget to access the widget settings, and in your Data and Chart Type section, update the data source by clicking Edit. You'll notice that our data source sheet has already been selected. Now select the second data set that you'd like that chart to point to. Then hit OK. With the data source updated, you can see that the legend and the pie chart has been updated with the new data set. Now let's update our chart title. We want to update this from projects by status to projects by health. You can update the title by clicking directly into your chart title or going to the title section in the widget settings. Now let's update our chart colors to match our project health indicators. Again, we'll go to the pie chart and series section and update the colors respectively. For on track, we'll choose a deep green. At risk is yellow. And delayed is red. Great, both of our charts are all set. The next widget that we'll add will be our rich text widget type. This will give context around the project health and what constitutes a project to be on track, at risk, or delayed. Again, click the plus icon on the right-hand side and select the rich text widget. For our thoughtful title, we'll type in Project Health Determination. With our title added, click anywhere inside of the rich text widget to start adding your text. Now take the time to add the following text to this widget. Great, now that our text is added, you can take the time to add some styling to the text. So maybe we'll bold our health text. And let's add the font color to match the actual visual indicator in our chart. Now, yellow text is really hard to read. So instead of changing the font color to yellow, we'll just change the background color of at-risk text instead. And let's italicize this little footnote at the end. Perfect. Now let's update our widget title styling. I'll change the alignment to centered Instead of bolding, I'll underline the title. And I'll remove the background color. So we'll just change this to white. Now we'll just quickly resize this widget and create more space for our additional widgets. Now that we have our pie charts that's highlighting our summary section, we're now ready to add the report widget that will list out all of the projects in our portfolio sheet. Click the plus icon to add a widget and select report. Now click the add report button to select the report. We'll input our report name to search. Once the widget has been added with the selected report, you have a few options to customize the widget. You can update the number of maximum rows that you show on the report, remove the formatting, hide the Gantt chart, or collapse the grouped report. For this widget, we won't make any of these configuration changes, so we'll leave it as is. In the title section, let's rename the title. I've went ahead and added the title Project Portfolio All Projects, but feel free to use whatever title that best suits your audience. Now that we have our title, you're free to make this widget an interactive widget. You can allow your audience to view the actual report in a separate window, open another URL, or open another Smartsheet item. This can be the project portfolio sheet or a workspace where you hold all of your project plans. Keep in mind, if you choose to have your audience go to the data source, meaning the report itself, you'll need to make sure that that audience has access to that report. If that audience is just wanting to view the information on the report, you're okay with giving them a viewer permission level. But if they need to make updates to the actual report, meaning they need to update percent completes, actual end project dates, and so on, you'll need to make sure that they have at least an editor permission level. Once you set your widget behavior, the last section of this report widget settings is the viewer mode. This is where you choose the perspective that your audience will see the report results. You have two options, the last widget editor or their own perspective. By default, the last widget editor option is already selected. This means that whoever is looking at the dashboard will be able to see the same information that you or the last person that's made edits to the widget can see. Choosing the their own perspective option will allow the audience to only see information based on the sheets that have been shared with them. In this scenario, we'll leave the last widget editor selected. By now, you should have saved your dashboard to lock in all of the changes that we've made. Saving your dashboard kicks you out of the editor mode. To jump back into the editor mode to add more widgets or make changes to existing widgets, you can either click the pencil icon on the top right corner or select the edit menu and select edit dashboard. All right, now we have our summary charts and our report. Now let's tackle the remaining two sections on our dashboard metrics sheet, our quarterly data. For these two sections, we'll be adding 4 charts. We'll be adding 2 line charts to highlight the projects expected to start and end, and projects actually started and ended. Then we'll add 2 bar charts to highlight the on-time start and on-time end rates. Let's start with our first line chart. Click the plus icon to add widget and select chart. Then we'll add our data and select our data source, which is our project dashboard metric sheet. From here, we'll select our data set from rows 10 to 12. Make sure to include our header rows that have our Q1 through 4 data here. Then hit OK. Now that we have our data, let's configure this in a way that makes sense for our audience. First, we're going to switch our rows and columns so that our Q1 through 4 data is on our horizontal axis. So on our chart widget settings, we'll toggle the switch rows and columns on. With our axis in place, let's update the chart type from a column to a line chart. There are 3 options for line charts that you can choose from: the standard line, smooth line, and a stepped line. The basic line is one of my favorite options, but you can choose either one of these options that best fits your audience. Now let's move to the next section to update our title. The title we'll use here is Project Start Performance. Again, these titles are just guides for you to get this up and running. You are free to use whatever title that best fits you. If you'd like to change the styling of your axes, you can do so on the horizontal and vertical axis sections. In these sections, you can enter an axis title, change the title styling, and the label styling as well. You can also toggle on and off the tick marks on the actual chart. I like the look of the tick marks on the chart, especially when there's a lot of white background going on. And I'll also bold my axis label so that my Q1, Q2, Q3, and Q4 text is a little bit more legible. In our series section, we'll update the colors of the lines that appear on the chart. From my drop-down menu here, I'll select my first data set, my project's plan to start. For this data set, I will make the color gray, and then for my projects actually started, I'll change that to blue. Now, I really enjoy the look of a filled line on these types of charts. To me, it just gives a little bit more of an aesthetic to the dashboard, especially when you have a white background. You do have some flexibility on what data sets you add a filled line to. So for instance, if you only wanted to fill the line for the projects actually started, you'll leave the selected data set here in this top drop-down menu. Then you'll toggle on the fill line. Doing so will only apply the fill line to that data set. If you'd like to add the fill line to all of the series in the chart, you'll select the Apply to All Series in the drop-down and toggle on the fill line option. Applying a data label works the same way. You can apply it to all of the series in the charts or to just one data set. Let's go ahead and show the value label for all of our series. Now, the last thing that we'll do on this chart is change the position of the legend. I like to give my line charts enough space where you can see the actual progression of the lines. So in my legend section, I'll change the legend position from right to bottom. Great. This chart is all set. I'm just going to move this over to the bottom to make room for the additional charts that we'll add. Now we'll be adding a similar chart for our project end metrics. So let's go ahead and copy this widget and paste it right next to project start. Now let's update this chart to match our project end metrics. We'll edit the data source and select our project end metrics data set. Again, we'll switch the rows and columns and change the chart type to a line. Then we'll update our title to say Project End Performance. Because we copied from our first chart that we created, all of the series colors has carried over into our new chart. You're free to keep these colors the same, or you can add different colors to differentiate between the two charts. And lastly, we'll add our fill line to the chart. We'll drop into our series tab and toggle the fill line option on. Let's now add our last two charts. Again, these will be bar charts that highlights the on-time start and on-time end rates. Let's jump back into our dashboard editor. We'll click the plus icon to add a widget and select the chart widget. At this point, you should know the next step that we're going to do, adding our data. Let's first add our on-time start rate data. We'll select the entire data set in row 13. Then hit OK. Like we did in our line chart, let's switch the rows and columns. Now you'll notice that our Q1 through Q4 information is not showing up on our chart here. Instead, it's just populating our column names. When we add our second bar chart for our on-time end rate, we'll take a quick second to jump back into our metric sheet to make a few updates. For our chart type, you can choose between the column or the bar chart type. Honestly, either one of these will work in this case. So I'll select a bar option. Now let's update our title to on-time start rate. Then on our vertical axis, let's bold the axis label. Again, when we update our column names in our dashboard metric sheet, we'll see Q1 through 4 on the chart. And lastly, let's go ahead and remove this legend. Great, so let's move this down. And let's add our last chart widget. Again, we'll copy this widget and paste it right next to it. And of course, we'll update our data source, selecting our data from row 17, switching our rows and columns, changing the chart type to a bar chart, and lastly, update our title. Now that we have our two charts for our on-time start and on-time end rates, it would be valuable to add a percentage data label to our charts. So let's jump into our dashboard editor, double-click on our on-time start widget, and jump into the series section. Then toggle the always show value label, and we'll do the same for our on-time end rate chart. All right, let's take that quick second to update our column headers in our metric sheet. You'll go to your Browse tab and jump into the workspace where you have your sheets. On our sheet, double-click on column 2, and we'll rename this to Q1. Do the same for the remaining 3 columns. Once your column headers are updated, go ahead and save the sheet, and let's jump back into our dashboard. As you can see, our quarterly headers have now been updated on our on-time start and on-time end rate charts. At this time, we'll add one more widget to our dashboard. We'll be adding a shortcut to our project portfolio sheet. Jump into the dashboard editor by clicking the pencil icon and select Add Widget. Then select the shortcut option. Click the Add Shortcut button and select the Smartsheet item option. Now search for the project portfolio sheet in the search bar and select that item. Once the sheet is selected, click OK. Once you've added your shortcuts to the widget, you can change the layout of how the shortcuts are being viewed on the widget. You can choose between the side-by-side layout or the stacked layout. If you plan to add more shortcuts to this widget, I always recommend using the side-by-side layout because it does take less space on the dashboard. But at the end of the day, you have creative reign here, so you choose what's best aesthetically looking for you and your audience. And finally, we'll add our thoughtful title. And following my advice of keeping it simple, I'll just name this Shortcuts. Awesome! Now we have all of our widgets that we need in our dashboard. Now take your time to resize and rearrange all of your widgets in a layout that works best for you and your audience. I'll also be taking the time to go back and adding all of the background colors to the remaining widgets. Now the rest of this module will just be a time lapse of me rearranging and resizing these widgets. So feel free to stick around and watch me work or move to the next module. Congratulations! You've gone from zero to solution in no time flat. I hope you've enjoyed the course and found some inspiration on how to apply what you've learned in other processes in your organization.